my rules. Big moves. Y'all heavy on the tweeting. I'll disappear a whole season like, who said they looking for me? I'ma make you wait for it. Count down for me. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome back to Hold My Heels, the power of unapologetic living. Today, I'm going to kickstart the series on allies, co-conspirators, and disruptors. This series will culminate in an episode surrounding the trauma responses of Black women being under or unsupported in the workplace. The final episode of this series will be about Black feminism and the impact it has on systemic racism, which will ultimately jumpstart a series of conversations with members of my sister circle in regards to their journey in areas of intersectionality. I will even be letting y'all hear from some of my favorite male co-conspirators and disruptors in the series, so buckle up and prepare yourself. Now, after last week and listening to the podcast a couple of times, I realized that I did not do something last week and nobody even said anything about it. But I didn't ask y'all if y'all went to therapy yet. Have you gone to therapy yet? Have you found somebody that you can lay your thoughts on that can help you navigate that? If not, please go to blackgirlstherapy.com and find somebody, or use your medical insurance to find somebody who's in network that you can love and they can help guide you and support you. Now, this week was fantastic for me. I had over 200 listens this week, and I am just I'm floored. I'm blown away, and I just appreciate you all, and I'm so grateful that you all were here to listen to the podcast, and I'm glad that you shared to friends and colleagues. Hopefully we'll be able to continue to grow together and use the things that we hear to learn and grow in our allyship towards each other. Now, I want to make sure that you're the first to know about new episodes, so please hit that follow button and the notification for new episode drops. As I said, today's episode is going to be about allies, the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So if you have social media, or you have a social media addicted friend, hello, it's me you're looking for. I won't sing very much more. Like, there is one more song I'm going to sing, but it's on another episode, so just bear with me. So a few weeks ago on social media, the topic of conversation was, if you were a woman, would you rather face a bear or a man? So, which I will have to say that I'm going to choose the bear. But no, if you see me and a bear fighting, help the bear, because it's on and popping. But really, all women know why they choose the bear. And it's just unfortunately the way that the world works, that women have to navigate safe spaces. And lots of men were very off-put by this information. They were like, well, the bear is going to kill you. And it was like, well, yeah, but they're going to do it quickly. And I know that that's what a bear is capable of. But in a lot of situations, women were saying, with men, there are so many ways that a man can harm me that I don't want to be in spaces with them a lot of times because I never know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm going to be sexually assaulted, or if I'm going to be mistreated, or if I'm going to be beaten, or if I'm going to be killed, or like there's not a lot of safety in working around that way. And so listening to women talk about that, lots of men were able to grow from that and were able to hear it and process and move forward. But lots of men were just like, not all men. So from that conversation, a TikToker by the name of White Woman Whisperer, she posed another question. She said, if you're in a conference room and you have to choose between a white man or a white woman coming into that room, which would you choose? And she pushed that out to marginalized women. And overwhelmingly, women of marginalized groups chose the white man. What's even more unfortunate is that white women begin to combat this sentiment, saying, not all white women, I'm an ally, I would never sexually assault, another woman. And it was like, no, it's not just about sexual assault. It's about care and concern and kindness. Like, are you going to be an ally, or are you not going to be an ally? And lots of women talked about how with men, immediately if they don't like you, immediately if they have racist tendencies or they have sexist tendencies. And with women, it's a lot harder to navigate that and understand if they have those issues, because they do a lot of performative work. And so you kind of get blindsided a lot of times. And so I think that that's another place that we need to sit and think. And so it made me think about this week's episode with allyship, because remember I said last week that allyship is really the beginning point of supporting marginalized groups. And it made me think about feminism as well. And a lot of people think that all feminists agree, and they do not. Ultimately, because we don't check for each other, like, which is a crime shame. And if you've been saying a crying shame, shame on you, because it's crime shame. And I'm just as country as the next person. So I was definitely saying a crying shame, but it's a crime shame, because basically you've done something that is so shameful that it might as well be a crime. And in this instant, as feminists and as women, it is a crime shame that we are not checking for each other the way that we should. Now, I'm going to say something that might make some people sad, but hear me out. The reason that there are so many sects of feminism is because in order to be a true ally, you have to recognize that even though you aren't a member of a marginalized group, you want to support them and make a concentrated effort to better understand the struggle of that marginalized group's circumstances or situation. So at least that's what the National Institute of Health says, that like that's how they define allyship. So when we think about it, like if I'm not trying to understand another marginalized group's circumstances because it could be different from mine, then am I really trying to be an ally for them? Am I really working for them? Now, as a Black feminist, I understand that my areas of intersectionality are not the end all be all. And I try my hardest to understand the struggle of others who are marginalized. But good old-fashioned feminism really wants people to forget that they have multiple intersections that subject them to different forms of racism, and that all of those things need to be corrected, not just the marginalization of being born with two X chromosomes, which brings us back to the importance of being an ally. Last week when we talked about performative allyship, we talked about how, it's not okay to just stay in allyship. You've got to move. I also thought about something that was quite funny to me in this world of people talking about being an ally and people talking about, supporting marginalized groups. In 2020, when I Googled the definition for ally for a course I taught, the first 2 pages were all, organizations providing definitions. And now this year when I did it, the first page was all dictionary definitions. And I'm not really sure if that's good or bad. I was really sad that the second page was a bunch of corporations selling products and curriculums surrounding diversity, equity, inclusion, which is absolutely disgusting because we should not be monetizing people doing the right thing. So as I started to do more research, because I wanted to make sure that it was up to date and that it was really powerful for people as they are growing, because what I have learned through the last couple of weeks is that lots of people are listening to the podcast and are using it to grow in their response to systemic racism. So I always want to make sure that it is upfront and powerful. So I came across an article entitled "The Differences Between Allies, Accomplices, and Co-Conspirators May Surprise You" by Dr. Tiffany Jana. She discusses how allyship is just the beginning of a walk towards bringing systemic change to organizations and the places that you're involved in. It made me think about allyship as the equivalent of the Bible verses when Paul is talking to the Corinthian church for having fragile faith. So please turn your word to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1-5. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. "But I, brothers, could not address you as spiritual people, but as people of the flesh, as infants in Christ. I fed you with milk, not solid food, for you are not ready for it. And even now you are not ready yet, for you are still of the flesh. For while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way? For when one says, 'I follow Paul,' and another, 'I follow Apollos,' are you not being merely human?" Now, that concludes the reading of our word. May God add a blessing for the readers, listeners, and doers of his word. Cue the shout music, y'all. All right, listen, side note, I play way too much, but God and my ancestors know my heart, so he ain't gonna strike me down right now, okay? He got me because he understands me. But think about that. Think about how allyship is the beginning. It is you saying, I want to learn more about this, and I want to grow, but I'm not ready for the big stuff. I'm not ready to take on the world. And that's okay. But at some point you do have to go on to solid food. So hopefully this series will help you understand how you can go from allyship to being a disruptor. Another reason that I think of allyship as the beginning step is because you have to get on your Zoom and you have to be quiet. Like, we need you to mute and we need you to turn off your camera, but we need you to stay focused. And you can keep your camera on, but like, get on the Zoom and be quiet and listen and learn instead of trying to like go in and immediately change things. So that's why I think allyship is a good place to push in. Now, this is also the time that marginalized groups give people the most grace because it's evident that you're not trying to be performative. You know, your work that you're doing is present and visible. You're not asking people to give you everything. You are trying to learn on your own, and then you're asking questions and you're asking for guidance, but you're not like, I don't know how to be an ally. I need Black people to tell me what to do. No, nobody's going to tell you what to do. We need you to do some work. Like, everybody got to work together. Now, when you want to stand in sacred space with understanding that you aren't well versed in and you're still learning and willing to do the work, that is what's meaningful to people. The work is what pushes someone from ally to co-conspirator. Now, I said last week about accomplices, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit. There are many scholars that talk about this step of accomplice because they believe that it's the reactive phase going from allyship to accomplice. And I think that as you're growing and learning as an ally, your actions should align to your words pretty quickly. So I think of the role of accomplice as a Euro step between ally and co-conspirator. Dr. Tiffany Janda has done a lot of work around this, and we'll tap into more of it during the co-conspirator episode. Now, for those of you who do not know what an Euro step is, it's a basketball term that means a move where an offensive player picks up their dribble and they take a step in one direction and then quickly take a second step in another direction. Or if you're in a Black household, traveling and or doing too much. See LeBron. Now, I'm teaching you sports ball and systemic racism. Harrison Butker would be so appalled. Like, you're going to be able to be out of the kitchen and they're talking to the men about the sports ball. I'm not sure which one of them because I'm not going to give you a lot, but you just throw in some words. Go team, just, I got you. I'll throw in some more later so we can learn, right? Now, back to the heart of it. Let's get into some initial pitfalls of being an ally because I want to acknowledge that being an ally is not easy, okay? It takes a lot. So Dr. Lauren Miskuk, in an article for Psychology Today, she talked about 4 pitfalls of the ally. The first one is the hero-victim narrative. This is that white savior complex. It's a thing and it's ugly. And marginalized people are not helpless victims. And you're not a hero. We don't need you to put on a cape. We don't need you to save nobody. We don't need you to feel sorry for us. We don't need that. And then there are pseudo allies. We talked about these people last week. Pseudo allies and their hidden agendas. These are performative individuals. They're doing it for the gram and likes. They're doing it for people to recognize them. They are not doing it because they ultimately care and want to see great things for you. They're doing it because they want a pat on the back. Then there is role confusion. And this is where a lot of allies get in trouble. And I think this is the one part that pushes allies from being allies going back into the dark. They try to become the expert on a marginalized group's plight. They overstep their boundaries. They have a lack of deep understanding of the issues, and they center their privilege. These are those people that you see on social media where they're like, you say, as a Black woman, this happened to me. And they're like, oh no, that's not how you should have acted. This is actually what happened. And this is what you need to do. And you're like, wait a minute. You can't tell me as a Black woman how to show up to a lived experience or respond to a lived experience. Like, you don't know that. Also, those are those people who will say things like, oh, well, I've never seen that happen. Don't do that. Now, the last one is overlooking intersectionality. And remember, I talked about earlier, like, why there's so many factions of feminism. This is one of them. You decide that all marginalized people have the same experience and need the same supports. Without recognizing that nuances and levels of privilege that people may hold allows them to encounter the world differently. One of the things that I think that a lot of people forget is that even as a Black woman, I have privileges that allow me to be in spaces that other Black women may not have. And there are privileges that I don't have that don't allow me in spaces that some Black women get to be in. Like Kamala Harris and I have, Vice President Kamala Harris and I have lots of similarities. We are both AKAs. We are both Black women. We both have leadership roles. She has intersectionality of being the vice president of the United States. I don't have that. She is married to someone who is not her race. I have never experienced that. Like, she makes way more money than I do. That's a privilege that she has that I don't have. And I wish, if somebody wants to give me the same salary that she makes, I'll take it. Thank you. But, our privileges are different, even though on the surface we could appear the same. So now I want you to think about we've talked about the pitfalls of being an ally. We've talked about what performative allyship is. Now let's talk about what a good ally can be. So Meg Warren and Michael Warren published their findings in the Harvard Business Review in their article entitled Research, What Effective Allies Do Differently. They discussed a model that they created to combat the traps of performativeness. Their model, the ethic model of allyship, it provides 4 stages that an ally can use to grow. Stage 1 is, energize your psychological investments. Here is where you use compassion and fairness to identify social injustice. You acknowledge suffering and you use prompt responses that can alleviate it. So it's about seeing something and being like, oh, I can show care to these people. Like, I'm going to acknowledge that something is happening. I'm going to try to figure out ways that I can support or help in these areas to alleviate some of the stresses. The second stage is think through inequities and allyship strategies. Here you have to use humility and perspective taking to motivate you to seek out further knowledge. And you use what you learn in order to have new allyship strategies. So if you are think about this, if your allyship strategy is when you see something happen, you decide, I'm going to say something right now. So you're in a meeting with a bunch of people and somebody is disrespectful or they're showing a microaggression against somebody that's in a marginalized group. And you're like, no, don't do that. That's not what you're going to do. You may not be showing humility or taking the perspective of that person who may not want that. So you have to think about, how do I help in this way without making it more uncomfortable for the person that I'm trying to help? Then you have to take initiative to support and regulate your actions. This is the hard one. You have to take the initiative of transforming your learnings into action. You have to have moral courage and honesty. That's hard. Having courage is hard in a lot of situations. And so moving through the steps of becoming an effective ally, these are not, 1, 2, 3. These are like a circle. Some days it's going to be 1, 3, some days it's going to be 4, some days it's going to be 2. So you have to think about how you're going to use these stages to grow. So the last one is the one that's most important. You have to have commitment and long-term dedication. Being an ally requires practice. You have to have feedback from people who you are trying to be an ally to. You have to have patience and perseverance because it is not easy. Because nobody is asking for allies to burn bridges and, chuck the deuces, because that's not how we make long-term systemic change. Those of us in a marginalized group are looking for people who will have our backs, who will operate in integrity, doing the right thing when nobody is looking or there's nothing in it for you, and who will be self-reflective and truly grow and become a better human. So that's the part about being an ally, is having great courage, being able to be humble, being able to be patient, being able to be honest with yourself and asking, why am I doing this? Am I going to get something out of this? Am I looking to get something out of this? And then being able to identify when there is an injustice and acknowledging, to that person and to, the system, hey, this isn't right. Now, if last week's episode brought you here, you might not like this. You might even be livid. because I'm going to give people their flowers. It's called balance, baby. Balance. I actually struggled with if I was going to acknowledge the flurry of emotions and chatter around last week's lived experience. Ultimately, I decided that I would. If you've been listening to this podcast since its beginning on April 1st of 2024, you know that I said I would not be bashing people on Beyonce's internet, and I won't. This podcast is not a I hate this person or I hate this organization podcast. That's not what this is. This is a podcast about how Black women navigate the harm that stems from systemic racism. I wish I didn't have any content. I wish that I lived in a world that I did not have to talk about these things that occur because of the structures in place that uplift racism. I wish that I lived in a world that valued me as a human and as a woman. But research and lived experiences of millions of Black women say otherwise. So there is not a week that goes by that a Black woman, I am 6 degrees of separation or less, comes to me and says, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for speaking the truth. I can't like your podcast out loud because of where I work or who I interact with, or I don't want people to know that I'm going through these things. I will not stop doing this work. I will not be bullied. I will not be maligned. So I'm going to address last week's lived experience and the ill-placed emotions and derogatory conversations had because of it. Okay? Everything I have highlighted in this podcast came to fruition. I was the angry Black woman, scorned and vengeful. I was a bully. The aggressor became the victim. People didn't live in truth, but in fantasy. All of the things that I said so far that we have to deal with just bubbled right on up. And people have my back. People who speak to me every day and people who rarely, if ever, speak to me had my back. And for that, I am grateful. And I'm grateful that I have sown light into the world. And when people heard things about me that went against what they know of me, they stood in the gap for me. Many of them were allies, people who have never had my back but didn't want to stand on the sidelines and allow me to be slandered. People use their privilege to speak up against hate and prejudice. And I thank my allies, the co-conspirators and disruptors, and especially those I consider my friends, for having my back as the rumor mill swirled. I watched from the sidelines as people dug into the lessons that I've tried to provide in every episode to protect marginalized people. And unfortunately, last week it was me. Hearing people tell others to not take someone's words but go and listen for themselves made my heart warm. I'll never forget a conversation I had a few years back with an individual that came up last week for me. And it was years ago, so this isn't anyone recent. And I'm going to paraphrase because it's been a long time. They basically told me, I've watched people do wrong by you, and I'm sorry I didn't say anything then. I was afraid. I was afraid that they would treat me like they treat you. And they said that they left so many situations where they realized if they had just changed the subject or disrupted the flow of conversation, that would have been enough. And I think about what we learn about allyship is that it takes courage and it's hard. And you don't want people to turn on you because typically people who are being racist or prejudiced or committing microaggressions, they're part of a privileged group. They are people who are seen as high-powered in a group. They are using what they are doing to maintain power structures. So it's hard to come back against them because you don't want them to turn on you too, because bullies are bullies. So I ultimately understood that, allyship takes courage and empathy. And those are not always two traits we exhibit at the same time. I realized in this situation that social capital is a stronger drug than any that Dear Cop told me about when I was in school. Like, there is no drug as strong as social capital for a lot of people. So last week's lived experience was my response to having my integrity called into question in various settings. I told y'all that I wasn't going to be churchy on this podcast, but y'all gonna have to forgive me this week because I had to go into my prayer closet and really think about how I was going to respond to this and if I was going to respond at all. After reflection, I believe that I did the right thing. I was quiet for a long time, which is Matthew 5:39. Then I went to those who were misrepresenting me and had conversation with them. I allowed them space to own up to their words and ultimately try to change their behavior, which is Matthew 8:15. They chose to double down. They chose to continue to slander me in a way because it's slander if it's not true. I need us to, I like to have definitions, and slander means that I say something about you or you say something about me that is not true. And I try in this life to not say anything about somebody that is not true, because all I have is my word. So I ultimately chose to show the rocks in their hands and in their pockets, because I don't want my good deeds to be spoken evil of, which is Romans 14:16. And I know it's about food and drink, but my godmama tells me this all the time, to not let my good deeds be spoken evil of. So I spoke on this particular current issue because, number one, I don't play about my reputation, not even a little bit. So when someone consistently tries to come for my character and integrity, I will always ask them directly regarding any rumors I've heard, because I told y'all in the very first episode, you only lie to people that you're afraid of. And I ain't met nobody yet I'm afraid of. And I know that people are messy, and I know that people will do things to start a shitstorm and then go inside so they don't get hit with anything. And so I like to go to people and ask them face to face. But I like to listen to their explanations, and then I watch their future actions. And if your actions don't change or they get worse, I know that you don't have care for me, even if I've had care for you and I've shown you care. Even if you're not a kind person, I still try to give you the benefit of the doubt. But be ye not deceived. I will act accordingly to protect myself. As a Black woman, my name, image, and reputation are priceless. Someone's lies can cost me greatly. Victimhood looks great on some people, but it does not look good on me. I do not get that luxury as a Black woman. I was not allowed to cry at all this week when people had thrown their rocks and then wanted to go and cry and say that I was being mean to them or that I was talking about them or whatever it is. And I will say this, I did not say nobody's name, because I believe in honoring people's privacy. And I also never harm people for the gram or for clout. And the only way you will know who I'm talking about is if you have had the same or similar experiences with that individual, or they out themselves. So this is evidenced by the amount of people who called and asked me, who are you talking about? To which I replied, who do you think I'm talking about? And when they gave me a name, I said, what makes you think that? Because, I'm a good coach, because I'm going to ask coaching questions, because I want to get you to open up to help me understand why you think I'm talking about somebody. And I will say that there is no need for me to ever harm anybody, because God does his big one behind me. He don't play about me. And it is because when I move from a place of authenticity and care for others, I am never worried about bad karma spinning the block, because I know what it feels like to be maligned, to be talked about, to be slandered, to be put in bad situations based off of somebody wanting social capital. So I don't do it. And if at any time anyone thinks an episode is about them and they want to reach out, I welcome it. I'd love for you to tell your side of the lived experience, because your perspective from the incident may be different than mine, and that's okay. So I welcome that. And I am not above rebuke at all. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is I don't like dishonesty or trying to harm people through two-facedness. The truth needed to be told so that people could navigate through the chaos. In times of turmoil, we look for people to hold on to, and we want to know that we aren't alone and that we have allies in the storm. I wanted people to know that I still had their back. I was still fighting the fight that I promised 3 years ago, because the Lord said that vengeance is his, but I'll definitely alley-oop for him, okay? I am dedicated to not just being an ally, but being a disruptor of injustice, and I will use my privilege and my voice to speak up whenever I can. And although it does not always mean that my voice is valued or listened to, I am and always will be a marginalized individual. So I understand that even at times when it may cost me social capital, I still have to provide for other people. So whether you believe that I've had care or concern for you is not my business. Like Tabitha says, what you think about me is not my business. But every action I have committed has been for the greater good. And I can sleep at night. Clear conscience, clear skin, no worries. Now, with a few of my friends, I joked about how hate listeners should follow and subscribe so I can at least monetize off of the listens. But I don't want it. I don't need people who aren't at least 6 toes down for me. Everybody ain't got to be 10 toes down, and that's okay. I have survived cancer, 2 divorces, 3 adult children, the death of a sibling and a parent, and dating in the DMV in my 40s. I don't need to endure anymore. The love I have for Hold My Heels and the listeners is because I love to get phone calls or random text messages quoting something they heard or learned. I'm at the point in my life that I need love and light. I am tired of choosing the bear. So if you have come so that you can be messy or you can be a hate listener, I ask you to go away. I ask you to find something that brings you joy in your life, because if I don't bring you joy, I don't want you listening. That is the beauty of being an adult. You don't have to interact with me, and I don't have to interact with you. So now I release you from having to choose me. If you are here because you want to grow, because you value me and you value the lessons that I'm trying to provide, pull up a chair. It's a bumpy ride, but we'll make it. So I need everyone to remember, every step you take is a testament to your strength and your grace. Keep striding forward, hold your head up high, and never forget you've got someone to hold your heels when it's needed. I hope you conquer your world today. Until next time, stay empowered, stay you, and slay in your own personal way.
On my time. Yeah, I'ma make you